Hi, and welcome to the library's virtual presentation about media literacy. My name's Tracy, and a few weeks ago, I had the opportunity to take a media literacy class. Originally, I thought the class was intended to train teachers to train kids how to be media literate. And I was really surprised to find out that the class was to train librarians to train their adult patrons about media literacy. And I was really pleasantly surprised about this because adult learners are not digital natives and didn't have the same opportunities to learn these valuable skills to protect themselves from becoming victims of fake news. So this class is based off of the media literacy class that I took that was offered by PEN America in collaboration with the Every Library Institute. And if you're interested in getting more resources about media literacy, you can go to www.pen.org. So media literacy is simply the ability to identify different types of media and the messages they're sending. So today we're specifically looking at news sources found online. At the end of this presentation, I will be providing a toolkit or a checklist that hopefully you can take away one or two things that you can apply to your digital experience to help guide you into becoming a more assertive and responsible digital citizen. And I should say that what we're covering today is rooted in nonpartisan information and based on facts and not on personal beliefs. Okay, so before we really dive in, let's think about how most Americans are digesting their news. In a fast speed world of digital sharing, many are falling victim to disinformation or the spread of fraudulent news. In an effort to protect our freedom of speech, it is essential that we take our digital experience into our own hands. And rather than being passive or skeptical about all news, we need to use the tools that are available to us through media literacy to become assertive and in control of the information we are viewing. So the goal of today's workshop is to empower online users to implement proactive digital practices and take control of our own digital experiences. So a little bit later in this presentation, we'll be talking about disinformation and how it spreads. But first, I want us to focus on the threat of fraudulent news. So the tricks of persuasion aren't anything new. Deliberate propaganda has been around for hundreds of years. Similar tricks of persuasion are used today, and they can be difficult to recognize, which is why it's so essential we gain a better understanding of how to determine what is credible news. So, credible news has correction policies to help with the spread of misinformation. They cite their sources and they are transparent. That means that they clearly mark opinion columns, they disclose conflicts of interest, and they explain where and how information was obtained and how it was verified with links to their sources. Also, because of the rate at which information can be spread online and how it's constantly evolving and taking on new shapes, it can really make us feel uncertain about what to believe. And that really is not a good feeling. So the speed at which massive misinformation, whether it's deliberate propaganda or fake news, flows around the world is like digital wildfire. And this is thanks to social media. A recent study by Hunt Allicott and Matthew Jensnow, and these are professors of economics who have done really in-depth research about the spread of fraudulent news and its ties to social media. And they found that 62% of US adults get their news on social media. And the reason why this really isn't great is because social media itself is not a news source. Rather, it's a link or a gateway for people to share news. The JSTOR Daily, which is a digital library of academic journals, books, and other materials, says this about the spread of false news. The World Economic Forum in 2016 considered digital misinformation one of the biggest threats to global society. Researcher Vivian Rose furthermore points out that while traditional media has lost credibility with readers, for some reason, internet sources or news have actually gained in credibility. This may do lasting damage to public trust of the news, as well as public understanding of important issues, like when scientific or political information is being repackaged and retold by the media, especially when coupled with our collectively deteriorating ability to interpret information critically and see propaganda for what it is. All right, let's talk about disinformation versus misinformation. So disinformation is demonstrably false information created with the intent to deceive the public. These can be news sources created by foreign actors stoking political polarization, or even domestic political actors using disinformation to spread their beliefs or agendas against political rivals, and they can be difficult to discern. Misinformation, on the other hand, is false information that is shared in error. And so I use this example of these swans in the Venice Canal because this was an article about how at the onset of the pandemic and the lockdown in Italy, that because there was fewer people in the streets of Venice, the swans and dolphins were able to come back to the canals. And this wasn't true. There is a canal in Venice where there are always swans. It's just an area that's rarely visited by tourists. But this sort of news article, the reason why I share this is because this particularly affected me. It made me feel hopeful that there was something good going on during the onset of the pandemic, and that, at least the wildlife was able to come back. And so this would be an example of a news source that I might feel like I would really want to share with people, because it gives this sense of hope. However, that would be the spread of misinformation because it was not an accurate news story. All right, how disinformation spreads. So images are headlines that evoke strong emotions. When we read a headline and it evokes strong feelings, or see an image that makes us angry, or it's sad, or it aligns with our beliefs, we're more likely to share it. And the creators of these headlines and images are doing this on purpose and playing on our emotions to spread their beliefs. According to JSTOR Daily, most readers spend most of their reading time scanning headlines rather than reading the story. And this can be especially dangerous if we're getting our news from social media posts. When a news story has a patina of credibility or a kernel of truth, we're more likely to believe it. Like the example of the swans in the canals in Venice, there is that kernel of truth because we want to believe that the swans are coming back, and it makes sense that without the tourists, they would return to the canals. And this is why it's so important to take a moment to think critically about what we're viewing or reading before we share. Bots are computer-generated robots that look like human users but are fake accounts and can be found on social media. They are programmed to run automated tasks over the internet. They can work much faster than a person at spreading disinformation. This means that when we see something posted on social media, even though it may align with our beliefs, we have to be thoughtful about where it's coming from and look into the information to see if it's credible, because it could be coming from a fake source. The illusory truth effect is one of the reasons we are susceptible to believing false information, because the more we see something, the more likely we are to believe it. If we come across an article and we know it's false, but we keep seeing it, or it's coming from a friend or an acquaintance, the more we see it, the more likely we are going to start to believe it. Every time a lie is repeated, it begins to appear more plausible. And finally, the confirmation bias is when information confirms our views, and therefore we tend to be more likely to believe it. This is a part of the reason why it's so essential to diversify the sources where you get your news and to use regular fact-checking practices. And I will be providing some fact-checking resources at the end of this presentation. So the example here is of Pope Francis endorsing Donald Trump. And it was a video that was edited and spliced to purposely spread false news. Okay, manipulated or fraudulent news, misleading information that is spread quickly through Facebook and social media. So again, here's just some examples of headlines that have been spread through social media. And you can reflect on, you can reflect on how disinformation spreads, what we just talked about, and think about how these stories might spread very quickly through a social media platform. All right, so we've talked about this now quite a bit, but let's just reflect on what the threats are of disinformation. Social media increases the speed at which people are able to spread false information. It can easily be shared or liked. It also erodes public trust in the media. People feel uncertain where to go to get reliable and credible news sources. Conspiracy theories gain oxygen, something that we've really been seeing a lot very recently, and individuals are unable to discern truth from fraudulent news. So the first step in combating the spread of disinformation is reflecting on ourselves and thinking about where do we get our news. So this next slide is a chart of different types of media and how often you have access to these different sources. So I'll leave this slide up for just a moment and feel free to pause the video here as you just reflect on your own habits of getting the news. Think about maybe what you're doing now, and then maybe set a goal for yourself. How would you like to be getting your news? So people are increasingly getting their information from social media sites. However, like I already shared, social media is a gateway to news, but it's not a source itself. So we have to think critically about our news feeds. Are we using Facebook as a gateway to news articles? If you're passively clicking on articles in social media sites, is that how you would like to be getting your news? This is a passive approach, and it makes you more susceptible to becoming victim to fraudulent news. But you do have the power to actively choose where you get your information. And media literacy can provide you with the tools to take a more active role in where you go digitally to seek out information. And so this just shows us how the changes in social media have changed since the pandemic. So 25% more people are using social media. And social media is a great tool for sharing photos, connecting with family and friends, but it is important for us to reflect on where we're getting our news and hopefully looking outside of social media as a way to get our information. Okay, so here is our media literacy toolkit, what we can do to combat the spread of disinformation. So step one, think about the chart I showed you earlier and where you're getting your news currently. The power to spread disinformation rests with us, and we need to be informed news consumers. We can take control of where we're getting our information. We also need to stop and think honestly about what it is that we're actually seeing, and then think, is this content something that I should be sharing? Most adults do not want to share content that isn't credible. So this goes back to disinformation versus misinformation. However, spreading untrue information online does lead to that spread of fraudulent news, and we have to be responsible for our actions. Step two, disinformation outlets thrive on engagements such as likes and shares on social media platforms. They purposely are writing headlines designed to encourage you to spread their posts, even if they're false or misleading. So think about what emotions are being triggered personally in your own confirmation bias, and seek out diverse news sources. And this leads us to step three. When you see news or information online, you can trace it back to its source. You can use fact-checking sites, and I'll provide you a list here in a moment. And this can help you to verify whether it's a credible news source. You can also type the headline into a search engine such as Google to see if it's valid. And when you do that, if the bulk of your hits are saying that this is a false story, that's going to give you an idea of whether or not it's something you should believe or something you should share. And then think about, where's your news coming from? So if you are following or looking at a news article that's been shared maybe through Facebook, click on it and follow it upstream. Find out if it's a credible news source. And remember that credible news sources have correction policies to help with the spread of misinformation. They cite their sources and they're transparent, meaning that they clearly mark opinion columns, they disclose conflicts of interest, and they explain where and how information was obtained and how it was verified with links to their sources. And this chart just shows us the hallmarks of respectable and responsible journalism and credible news. And so as you take a moment to look through this, when you're distinguishing whether or not what you're looking at is coming from a credible news source, is it also hitting on these different ethics, quality, and standards of responsible journalism? Okay, and finally, here are some fact-checking sites that you can use to verify whether or not what you're looking at is coming from a credible source. So like I said, any online search engine, you can simply type in the title and you will get an idea of whether it's a true story or a false story. Also, if you're trying to find out more information about COVID, NewsGuard has a coronavirus misinformation tracking center. That's a very useful tool. Annenberg Public Policy Center at the University of Pennsylvania is a nonpartisan organization and monitors for political accuracy. And then there's politifact.com and reporterslab.org. All right, well, thank you for joining in this virtual presentation about media literacy. And I hope everyone's able to take one or two things that they can bring into their digital experience in order to help combat the spread of disinformation.